Well, the first thing I didn't know about Lewis shapers, or the 10th thing if you're keeping score here in the top 10, was that they even existed. But it turns out that these were a series of machine tools that were offered back in the 1930s and 40s, maybe even into the 1950s. And they came as a kit. So here's an example of a kit, and you can see you get the castings and a bunch of the other parts there, and then you got to put it together yourself. There were blueprints that came with the machine for certain aspects of it, but a lot of it was really left to the imagination of the builder. For instance, you didn't get a motor or pulleys with this, so if you're building one of these, you would have to come up with how you're going to power the thing. And there's a whole lot of other decisions like that that each individual builder had to make a decision about. And that's why it's rare to find two Lewis shapers that are identical. Well, I got this particular shaper in a lot that I got at an auction. And what happened, a guy died back in like 1980, and his daughter inherited all of his property. Well, she just went and closed his house up with everything in there, and then a couple of years ago she died without any heirs, or intestate they call it. And so when you die without any heirs, your property goes to the state and they sell it off. And so that's how I got it. It was in an auction. I noticed there were a lot of tools and some machine tools. You can see there's 3 cases of Pennzoil there from the 1980s. So anyway, I got the shaper as part of this lot. Now, if you'll notice, there's absolutely no safety features here on this shaper. There's no guard for the belt or the pulleys, and I don't think it's because they didn't care about safety when this was built back in the 1930s and 1940s, but it was assumed that you wouldn't stick your finger in there, or if you did, you'd only do it once. And in this case, whenever I'm making an adjustment to the ratchet, the table feed, the table height, the stroke, anything I'm making an adjustment to, I turn off the machine and I pull the plug. Now, as for the adjustment of the stroke, what I discovered after some trial and error is it needs to be roughly in this position right here to make the adjustment. You can see this very well, but there's some markers here and some numbers that tell you what the stroke is. The issue I had with this is that this is the wrench that came with the machine, and you can see you can't get it to adjust when it's up at the 10-inch level, and that perplexed me for a little while until I figured out that you can just grab a 1 1/16 inch wrench. There it goes. You can loosen that up. So once you get it in that position, you get it loosened, you can move it and put it at whatever position you want. Now this, the bottom of this would line up with these numbers to give you whatever stroke you want. There's maybe a 2-inch stroke right there. And now, of course, this wrench does fit. So we can use that to tighten it up. Okay, we're going to be touching things, so here's the plug. It's unplugged. And this is actually a full 10-inch stroke, an honest one. If we start here at the front of this that holds the down feed on, we go to the extreme. Right there. You can see that to this point here, In fact, it is 10 inches, yeah, plus a little bit. And so they were accurate in the 10-inch stroke. The issue is, as far as I can tell, let me get on this side, that if you had something that extended out 10 inches, it's going to be hanging out over the vise. So I'm not sure if there's enough support here. And the thing is, you can only, depending on the operation, go back this far. If this is tilted, it's going to start banging on the frame here. And the same thing with the clapper box. If you go too much further back and this is tilted, you're going to start hitting the ways here. So yes, it's a full 10 inch. If you're going straight down, you could come back to right there. And that would give you a full 10 inches. Well, here's the table support, and I really like how they did this with these locking lugs here. So that essentially locks it in that position. What I found though was that as you're moving your table, two things. One is that this was not plumb or perpendicular, whatever it is. But what that meant was that at this end of the feed, you were pretty solid. By the time you got over here, the whole thing was dipping down. So that was an issue. If you started here, it would be about 10 thousandths up at this end. So I ended up shimming it. The other thing is that it needs to be, don't baby this support. Go ahead and tighten it up so that there's some tension between the ways and the table here. Because otherwise, it still allows for quite a bit of flex, and you get a little divot as you start your cuts. Machinery usually takes oil to keep things moving, and one thing I noticed about this machine, it didn't have any way to oil anything. It did have these grease fittings here, and I took this off. I'm going to clean it up, and I'll actually convert this to an oil fitting instead. And I'd never used these, but the way they worked, back when, you'd fill this with grease, or fill the cup with grease, and then every day as you walk out and start to work on the machine, you turn this, quarter turn, something like that, and that would force grease down into the shaft. And it had these old type of fittings here. There's one on this, on the drive shaft, and a couple back here on the, if you can see that, back here on the counter shaft. And I switched those over to oil fittings. I prefer oil. I added, wherever I thought I needed them, I put Gitz oilers or ball oilers. So there's oilers here. Otherwise, you're just, putting oil along this joint, and maybe it gets down there okay, I don't know, but maybe not. So I thought this was an improvement on that. I also put oilers here on the table, or knee or saddle, whatever you want to call it, so I can oil this surface here, oiler here, one on the other side, and then oilers, let's see, oilers right here. I think you can see that, so I can get the bottom of this table feed here. Well, whoever built this machine, I think they did a pretty nice job, and as far as I understand it, with the Lewis machines, you got the castings for the machine. It's up to you to figure out how to do the motor and mount it and set it up and all that. So this one here has a turnbuckle here that holds the motor counter shaft. The motor's here underneath, and it's hinged so it can swing in and out like that. So you bring it in, and to change the belts, you basically just, I'm not going to go all the way to the fastest speed, but we're going to get close here. And so it's real easy to change speeds, you know, as easy it can be with a belt type of machine. And you just let the turnbuckle back. And you're back in business. So this is a very small stroke at one of the higher speeds. It's not the top speed, but it's pretty close. And I want to show you what happens with the long stroke too. Okay, that is your shaper on speed. Kind of a good argument for the old cast iron bases, isn't it? Well, if you've seen my other videos on the shaper, you know that I ran into a problem with the table feed or the ratchet mechanism, and we've addressed that, and people were pretty helpful in suggesting things to solve that, and eventually we got it done. But there's a couple of things that I've found out. One is that if you're ratcheting, if you're moving the table, say that direction, that this has to be on this side. If you turn around and ratchet the other way and you start running it, your ram is going to be going forward when the table's moving, and you end up with these funny looking divots on your workpiece and kind of like a curve or something. So when you do switch direction of the table travel feed, you also have to switch the location here off of the whatever shaft that is, and then you can run it the other direction. The other thing that happened with this one is that it's important that it be timed as this rotates. There are, if this is attached to the shaft here, this is turning with the bull gear, the shaft is, and if you're not attached to that shaft at the right location, there's no way you can time it so that the movement of the table happens on the reverse stroke of the ram. So I had to play with this a little bit, hold the shaft from the bull gear tight and move this around until I got it in a location where it feeds on the reverse stroke and it doesn't feed on the forward stroke of the ram. One of the problems I have with this is that the axis here, the porthole, whatever you want to call it, is too small. And I showed you when you got up to the top, you couldn't use this wrench, and it would just be a little handier if it was a little larger. Now, looking at some of the pictures of the old shapers made by Lewis, some of them have a larger hole here, access hole, and some of them have the smaller hole. I don't know that this is newer or older or when that change was made. But once you figure out that you have to be in this position and that you can use these kind of wrenches, the porthole's not quite as annoying as it was when I first started playing with it. This is in fact a universal table. It tilts. And you do that by removing or loosening this nut back here. And then you, I can get it in the picture here. You see this key here. There's a keyway, and when you put that key in there, that aligns the table so that it's parallel to the stroke of the ram, I guess you'd say. So it's not, the table's not tilted at all. So you loosen the nut, take that out, go ahead and tilt your table, and then tighten the nut back up. So this could be at whatever angle you want. The table does have these locations where you could put some sort of screws or something to attach a workpiece to the table. that you have a wrench for this, and how do you get that wrench on there. But as it is, going in there, you only have that much travel, so you can barely get it on the nut and make one slight turn, and you got to take it off and do it again. And so I suppose I can find a socket of that size, and an extension would be the trick. Well, and the number one thing I didn't know about shapers is that you're not alone. There is a resource out there on the internet at the groups.io site. So if you have a shaper and have questions about it, or how to run it, or what kind it is, or anything like that, this is a good source of information, because the people on this forum are generally pretty knowledgeable.